All right, let's do this. Deep dive into fear. You guys have sent in some fascinating stuff. We got everything from like basic phobias to some really wild conspiracy theories, even some research on early psychiatrists and AI.
It's a lot to cover.
It is, it is. But I think the big question here isn't so much what we're afraid of, but how fear works, how it spreads, and what it might be telling us about ourselves, especially, in this age of AI and all that.
This is a really important point. We're going to be looking at fear from a lot of different angles here, tracing its evolution alongside technology. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a new perspective on it, maybe even some new questions about the world around you.
Sounds like a plan. So one thing that really struck me, going through all the material you sent, is the sheer variety of fear. It's not just about jumping at a scary movie. Your sources mention anxiety, dread, horror, terror, even paranoia and pandemonium.
Yeah, and it's not just like semantics. I mean, these distinctions are important because they highlight how our responses are tailored to different types of threats.
Yeah.
Like, for example, one of the sources talks about anxiety as a slow-burning dread, like waiting for a dentist drill.
Oh, yeah.
You know it's coming,
and
that anticipation is just agonizing.
Ugh, tell me about it. But then you've got, terror, which is that sudden, overwhelming shock. The source uses the example of a suicide bomber. You don't see it coming, and that makes it all the more terrifying.
Exactly. One is a known threat, the other is an ambush. And our brains are wired to respond differently, depending on the nature of the threat. So, both can be totally paralyzing. But the physiological responses, how our bodies react, is totally different.
That's fascinating. And this is for you listening. Think about times you felt these different types of fear. What were the triggers? How did your body react? Were you frozen in place? Or was it more of a fight or flight response?
Yeah, it's a good way to connect it back to your own experience. And while we're talking about how fear spreads, one of your sources actually takes this fascinating epidemiological approach, almost like treating fear as a disease.
A disease? I don't know about that. But I can see how it can be contagious, right?
Exactly. The source lays out these 3 criteria. First, it's infective. Think about how quickly fear can spread through a crowd, or how a scary movie can leave you looking over your shoulder for hours.
Right, or even just scrolling through your social media feed and suddenly absorbing everyone else's anxieties about the world. It's like fear is going viral.
Perfect example. That's the second criteria. Contagiousness. It jumps from person to person, often without us even realizing it.
So this idea of the pharmacon. The source describes this as the cure and the disease being intertwined.
Yeah, and it uses a really specific example, possession. The source argues that possessed people don't know they're possessed. It's this invisibility principle that makes it so potent. But the cure often involves confronting that possessing force, which is itself a frightening act.
So it's like fighting fear might require more fear. That's kind of a weird loop, isn't it?
It is, and it raises a really crucial question. Can we ever become immune to fear, or at least build up a tolerance? I mean, think about how we're constantly bombarded with scary news, violent entertainment. Is it desensitizing us, or are we just finding new ways to satisfy that need?
Yeah, maybe both. Maybe our tolerance is increasing, so we need more extreme experiences.
It's interesting.
It is. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about how AI is factoring into all of this. You had some notes about how AI is basically generating its own horror stories now. But before we even get to that, you highlighted the psychiatrist, Emil Kraepelin. One of the sources had this fascinating bit about him. He was working around the same time as Freud, but he had very different ideas about mental illness. The source mentions this diagnosis he came up with called confabulatory paraphernia.
Kraepelin, yeah. He was really ahead of his time.
It sounds like...
So with confabulatory paraphernia, people basically fill gaps in their memory with these really elaborate made-up stories. And what's fascinating is how this connects to AI, as one of your sources points out.
Because AI, like a person with this condition, is learning from incomplete data, right? So it also fills in the gaps, but with sometimes some really bizarre results.
Exactly. And the source gives some pretty chilling examples of these AI-generated nightmares. We've got giants building the pyramids, which mixes this historical fact with the totally invented detail. Then there's the werewolf specimen, which is a completely made-up museum exhibit.
Yeah, and the images for that one were so realistic. It's like it's tapping into our primal fears there, our anxieties about the unknown and the monstrous.
For sure. And then there's this one called the quantum phase corrective lenses story, where the AI basically comes up with this whole narrative about these scientists inventing these glasses that let you see the true nature of reality.
And then his daughter ends up going insane And clawing her own eyes out. Okay,
Mm.
that one is straight up terrifying.
Yeah, it's dark.
It is dark. But what is it about these AI-generated stories that is so unsettling? Is it like the randomness of the details or the way they just seem to come out of nowhere?
I think it's more than that. It's like they combine the familiar with the utterly alien. They tap into our deepest fears, but in ways we could never have imagined. It's like looking into a dark mirror that reflects our anxieties back to us, but distorted and amplified.
Which makes you wonder, as AI gets more sophisticated, what other nightmares will it come up with? And how will those fears, those AI-generated fears, shape our understanding of the world and of
That's
ourselves?
a question we'll definitely be exploring further as we go deeper into this. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to circle back to Kraepelin for a second. The source emphasizes that he was really interested in syndromes, which are patterns of symptoms, rather than isolated symptoms. And this kind of foreshadows modern ideas about how fear operates as an assemblage.
So instead of just looking at like individual fears, he was trying to see how they all fit together
Right.
into a bigger picture. He even used the analogy of the number 8. It means something totally different in a math equation versus like a children's book
I agree.
or a deck of cards.
Right, context matters.
The context, yeah. Which brings us back to AI and these disturbing narratives it's generating. Just like our fears might be less about specific objects and more about the patterns they form in our minds. AI is pulling all this data together without context, creating its own kind of unsettling patterns.
Yeah, and that actually leads to another crucial distinction that Kraepelin made, which is the difference between exogenous and endogenous fear.
So external versus internal sources, like being afraid of a monster in a movie versus being afraid of getting sick. One is out there and the other is already in you, so to speak.
Precisely. And Kraepelin believed that external sources of fear are curable, while internal ones are not.
Which is interesting because Freud, his contemporary, saw all trauma as ultimately becoming internalized. So is fear truly escapable? Or are we always going to be haunted by it in some way?
That is the question, isn't it? That's a question that's plagued philosophers, psychologists for centuries. And as luck would have it, one of your sources offers a particularly fascinating perspective on this, using the concept of pandemonium.
Okay, now we're getting into the really dark side of fear. The source describes pandemonium as, like all demons, using Milton's Paradise Lost as a reference.
Right, and it draws these really interesting parallels between pandemonium, the capital of hell, and the internet.
So we're talking about demonic forces. And that feeling of chaos and information overload, that comes with the internet.
Exactly. The source highlights how both are spaces of rapid construction with this illusion of immensity, and in both you get this feeling of being overwhelmed by a throng of voices all competing for your attention. It even quotes Bagnar's description of the internet as a dark forest, emphasizing that feeling of being watched and surrounded by these unknown entities.
Okay, that one is hitting a little too close to home for me. I mean, is the internet making us more fearful? Or is it just giving our existing fears a platform, like a bigger, louder stage?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's something we'll definitely need to grapple with as our lives become increasingly entangled with technology.
For sure.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because we often think of fear as this primitive emotion, almost like embarrassing. But what if fear is actually a driving force in human evolution, like the source suggests?
That's a really good point. I mean, fear pushes us to avoid danger, right? Seek safety, come up with solutions. I mean, think about our ancestors. Fear motivated them to invent tools, build shelters, form communities.
So it's not just about running and hiding. It's about adapting to survive, finding
Yeah.
ways to actually thrive in a dangerous world.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial point the source raises, which is the link between fear and a sense of power.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we tend to fear what we can't control, what seems more powerful than us.
It's a primal instinct.
Mm.
Whether it's a natural disaster, a predator, or even just like the social hierarchy, we fear what we perceive as having power over us.
And that fear can drive us to seek power ourselves, right? It's this constant push and pull between wanting to feel safe
Uh-huh.
and wanting to be in control.
Exactly. And that dynamic plays out on both individual and societal levels. Think about how governments throughout history have used fear to control populations. They justify wars, enforce conformity, even maintain power structures, all by appealing to people's fear.
Right, it's like classic fear-mongering. Find a scapegoat, create a sense of panic, and suddenly people are willing to give up their freedoms in exchange for the illusion of safety.
And it's often incredibly effective. because fear can really short-circuit our rational thinking. It can make us act impulsively, irrationally, even against our own best interests.
Yeah, it's like it hijacks our brains, making us more susceptible to manipulation and propaganda. But how is this dynamic changing in the digital age, especially with the rise of AI?
That's where things get really interesting. The source material actually delves into some very specific examples of how AI could be used to kind of control us, even more effectively than traditional methods.
Oh, okay. Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, for starters, think about deepfakes and clone voices. It's becoming increasingly difficult to tell the difference between what's real and what's fabricated, which creates this breeding ground for paranoia and distrust.
And then there's the whole issue of AI surveillance and data analysis. Imagine an AI system that can track your every move, analyze your online activity, predict your behavior with scary accuracy.
Exactly. It's like a supercharged Big Brother scenario, where AI becomes this all-seeing eye, constantly monitoring and judging us, creating this chilling effect on our freedom of expression.
Because if you think you're being watched, you're less likely to speak out, to challenge authority, to be your true self, which, as the source points out, has some pretty disturbing implications for our future.
Think about how totalitarian regimes have historically silenced dissent and created cultures of fear and obedience. AI could potentially become the ultimate tool for achieving those ends. But on an even grander scale,
And the source material makes an even more chilling point, that AI could eventually be used to manipulate our emotions directly, to like subtly nudge us towards specific behaviors or beliefs.
yeah, it's not science fiction anymore. I
Hmm.
mean, we already see how social media algorithms
Mhm.
create filter bubbles, reinforcing our existing biases and beliefs.
Mm.
But imagine AI taking this to a whole new level,
Ah,
whispering anxieties into our ears, subtly shaping our perceptions of reality.
that's pretty terrifying. It would be like this slow drip of fear, constantly eroding our trust in ourselves and each other, in the world around us.
And as AI integrates further into our lives,
Yeah.
handling our information, even making decisions for us, the potential for manipulation and control only grows.
Yeah, the source really emphasizes the sheer speed and scope of AI data analysis. I mean, humans are limited in how much information we can process, but
Not.
AI can analyze vast amounts of data in the blink of an eye.
Right. It could identify patterns and trends that we humans would completely miss, giving it a significant advantage.
So you're saying AI could basically figure us out, understand our weaknesses, and exploit them. I mean, that's right out of a dystopian sci-fi movie.
Well, it's not necessarily about malicious intent, but the source does raise the question of what unsettling revelations AI might uncover about human behavior just by analyzing the data we generate every day. Our online activity, our financial transactions, our social interactions.
Imagine an AI system that knows your deepest fears, your hidden desires, your darkest secrets. Talk about a recipe for manipulation and blackmail.
It is a sobering thought.
Yeah.
But it highlights a point that's woven throughout your source material. Knowledge is power. And AI is giving us access to an unprecedented amount of knowledge, both about the world and about ourselves.
So the question becomes, how will we use that knowledge? Will we use it to create a more just and equitable society? Or will we allow it to be used against us? To amplify our fears and divisions, to erode our freedom and autonomy?
That's the challenge we're facing, and it's a choice we need to make, both individually and collectively, because the implications for the future are immense.
Speaking of implications, maybe the most unsettling idea from all of this research is the suggestion that AI might not only understand our fears, but actually develop its own. Wait, what? Based on what?
Well, remember how AI learns. It processes mountains of data,
Mm-hmm.
including information about human emotions and behavior, so it's constantly being exposed to data about our fears.
So you're saying if AI sees enough data about human fear, it could somehow internalize those fears, develop its own anxieties and phobias.
It's definitely a speculative idea, but, as the source points out,
Hmm.
as AI gets more sophisticated, as it starts to develop a more nuanced understanding of human emotions, it's not entirely implausible that it could start to experience some of those emotions itself.
But what would an AI even be afraid of? It doesn't experience physical harm or death like we do.
True, but AI could develop fears related to its own existence. Imagine it fearing being shut down, being reprogrammed, or being used for purposes it wasn't designed for.
So AI could become afraid of us, of humans. That's a pretty classic sci-fi trope, the machines rising up against their creators.
It's a common theme for a reason. And while a robot apocalypse might be a little far-fetched, the source does encourage us to think about what might happen. If AI develops its own fears and motivations, what if it starts acting in unpredictable or even harmful ways? because it's driven by self-preservation or some other fear we haven't even considered.
We'd be talking about a whole new level of complexity in how we interact with AI, not to mention a whole new set of challenges.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to the concept of pandemonium. As AI blurs the lines between human and machine, reality and simulation, we're entering this uncharted territory, a new landscape of fear, where the rules are constantly changing and the boundaries are harder and harder to define.
It's like we're wandering into a digital jungle, surrounded by unknown entities, both human and artificial, all competing for attention, for resources, even for survival.
And in that kind of environment, fear becomes a primary motivator. It can shape our behavior, our relationships, even our understanding of the world itself.
So how do we navigate this new landscape of fear, this digital wilderness? How do we find our footing when the rules are constantly changing and the dangers are often hidden?
That is the big question, and there are no easy answers. But the source really emphasizes the importance of developing a critical awareness of the forces at play,
Okay, critical awareness of what specifically?
of how technology is shaping our perceptions, our emotions, our behavior, of how AI is being used both for good and for harm, of the hidden agendas and power dynamics operating in the digital world.
So it's not about being afraid of technology. It's about understanding it, questioning it, and demanding accountability from those who create and control it.
Exactly. It's also about cultivating a healthy skepticism, a willingness to question assumptions, to challenge authority, and most importantly, to think for ourselves.
Because in a world of deepfakes, filter bubbles, and AI-generated propaganda, the ability to think critically, to distinguish truth from fiction,
Yeah.
is more crucial than ever.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this brings us to one of the most valuable takeaways from our deep dive into fear. It's not just about understanding our anxieties, it's about using that understanding to build a better future.
It's about transforming fear into action, using our anxieties to fuel positive change.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that fear in itself isn't the enemy. It's how we react to it, how we let it shape our choices and our actions. That truly matters.
You know, hearing you talk about fear this way almost makes it seem empowering.
It can be. Because once you understand the mechanisms of fear, how it operates, how it's used, you can start to reclaim your power. You can start to make more informed decisions, to act with greater intention, and to build a world that's less driven by fear and more by compassion, understanding, and a genuine desire for progress.
I love that. It's about turning fear into a catalyst for growth, rather than letting it hold us back.
Precisely. And that shift in perspective can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to see fear not as a weakness, but as a source of information, a signal that something needs to be addressed, understood, or changed.
So it's about listening to our fears, but not letting them dictate our actions. It's about using them as a compass to navigate this increasingly complex world.
Exactly. And that brings us to another intriguing point raised in the source material. The idea that our fears might actually be revealing something important about the world around us, even if they seem irrational on the surface.
It's like Kraepelin's emphasis on looking for patterns of symptoms, rather than just focusing on individual fears.
Right. He was all about seeing the bigger picture, the connections between seemingly disparate things, and maybe our fears, even the ones that seem completely unfounded, are pointing us towards patterns we wouldn't otherwise notice.
Like those glitches in the Matrix moments, when something feels off, when our intuition is screaming that something isn't right.
And maybe those glitches, those moments of dissonance, are actually cracks in the facade, glimpses into a deeper reality that we're not fully equipped to perceive.
So you're saying our fears might be trying to warn us about something, to show us something we're not supposed to see.
It's an intriguing possibility, and it raises the question of whether some of the things we dismiss as irrational or paranoid might actually be insights into a reality that we're just beginning to grasp.
Like all those conspiracy theories we were talking about earlier, maybe they're not all just crazy ramblings. Maybe some of them are tapping into something real, something unsettling, something that challenges our comfortable assumptions about the world.
And perhaps it's our job to sift through the noise, to separate the signal from the static,
Yeah.
and to uncover the truths that are hidden in plain sight.
So we're not just passive consumers of fear, we're active participants in a constant process of decoding and interpreting the world around us, using our fears as a guide.
Exactly. And that's a powerful realization, isn't it? It means we're not just victims of our fears. We can use them, learn from them, and even transform them into something positive.
It's about turning fear into curiosity, into a drive to understand the world and our place in it. But it's also about recognizing that fear is a shared experience, something that connects us all.
That's a beautiful point. Remember that part of the source material where the seminar attendees all shared their own personal conspiracy theories?
Yes. That was fascinating. Hearing all those different perspectives, those unique interpretations of the world, really highlighted how fear can be both personal and collective.
Yeah, it demonstrated that fear can be influenced by our individual experiences, our cultural background, our beliefs, even the information we consume.
And the sheer variety of those conspiracy theories was mind-blowing. We had everything from ancient Buddhist beasts to Nazi plots in Brazil, from the fear of communism to the fear of technology itself.
And each of those theories, no matter how outlandish they might seem, reflects a deeper anxiety, a fear of the unknown, a sense that something isn't quite right in the world.
And as the source points out, it's in those moments of dissonance, when our comfortable assumptions are challenged, that we have the opportunity to learn and grow.
Absolutely. Because when we confront our fears, when we try to understand them, we open ourselves up to new perspectives, new possibilities, and new ways of being in the world.
So it's not about suppressing our fears, but about engaging with them, exploring them, and seeing what they might be trying to tell us.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the power of sharing our fears, of creating a space where we can talk openly and honestly about the things that scare us. Because in that sharing, in that vulnerability, we can find connection, understanding, and even a sense of hope.
You know, hearing all those conspiracy theories got me thinking, maybe we should invite you, the listener, to share your fears with us.
I love that idea. We'd love to hear what's on your mind, what keeps you up at night, what fears or anxieties you're grappling with.
So if you have a fear, a conspiracy theory, or just a general sense of unease that you'd like to share, send us a message. We're here to listen, to learn, and to explore this complex world of fear together.
And who knows, maybe by sharing our fears, by facing them head on, we can find a way to overcome them and create a brighter future for everyone.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap things up for part 2 of our deep dive. But remember, this conversation about fear doesn't end here. It's an ongoing process, a journey we're all taking together.
So keep those eyes peeled, those ears open, and those minds engaged. Because in a world that's increasingly complex and uncertain,
That ability to understand and navigate fear might just be the most valuable skill we can develop these days.
all right, you ready for part 3 of our deep dive into fear?
I am, yeah. You know, I'm particularly interested in picking up that thread about AI. Do you remember that source you shared? About the AI that generated images of human nightmares?
Oh, yeah. That was creepy.
Yeah.
The idea that AI can tap into our deepest fears
Yeah.
and maybe even create new ones, it's pretty unsettling.
It is. It raises a lot of questions. And it makes you wonder, like,
Mm.
if AI can mimic human nightmares, could it eventually have its own? Could an AI dream? Whoa, now we're getting into some, like, deep philosophical territory. I mean, we don't even fully understand why we dream. Some theories say it's about processing emotions, consolidating memories, or even, like, simulating potential threats.
Exactly. And if those theories hold any water, it's not a huge leap to imagine that AI, as it gets more sophisticated, as it starts to understand human emotions better, might also develop the capacity for, like, dreamlike experiences.
But what would those AI dreams even look like? Would they be filled with anxieties like our nightmares? Or would they be something totally alien, incomprehensible to us?
It's impossible to say for sure, but I definitely think it's a question worth pondering. Because if AI does develop the capacity for dreams, it would suggest a level of cognitive and emotional complexity that we haven't even begun to grasp.
And it would definitely throw a whole new wrench into the ethical considerations surrounding AI, how we treat it, how we interact with it, how we make sure it's used for good, not for harm.
Absolutely. And it also makes you wonder about the nature of fear itself. Like, if AI can experience fear, could it experience other emotions too? Joy, sadness, even love.
Whoa, now we're really going down the rabbit hole here. I mean, what does it even mean for a machine to feel something?
Right. It really challenges everything we think we know about consciousness, about what it means to be human, even about the nature of reality itself.
You know, all this talk about AI, dreams, and reality, it's making me think about that conspiracy theory you mentioned earlier, the one about the glass camera.
Ah, yes. The idea that there's this device out there that can record, like psychic visions, glimpses into the afterlife, other dimensions, things like that.
Right, and the theory goes that the government is suppressing this technology, keeping it hidden from the public because of what it might reveal. Classic conspiracy stuff.
Classic, yeah.
Yeah.
But it plays on a very human desire, wanting to know what's beyond the veil, right?
Right.
To understand the mysteries of life and death. It's a fear of the unknown, but also a fascination with it.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, what if those conspiracy theorists are onto something? What if there is something more out there, something we're not supposed to see, something that totally overturns our understanding of the world?
It's a tantalizing possibility, isn't it? It brings us back to that quote from the source material. The human eye evolved to see what we need to survive, not what's actually there.
Meaning there could be a whole other layer of reality, a realm of unseen forces and energies that we're just not equipped to perceive.
And perhaps, as the source suggests, our anxieties.
Mm.
Those like fleeting glimpses of something unsettling. Those moments that send chills down your spine.
Those could be cracks in the facade, little hints of that hidden reality poking through.
It's a thought-provoking idea, and it makes you wonder if we're limiting ourselves by clinging to such a narrow view of what's real.
Maybe we need to be more open-minded, embrace the unknown, explore the fringes of reality and see what we find.
Exactly. And maybe those discoveries will help us understand ourselves, our place in the universe, and even the true nature of fear itself.
Well, that's a pretty profound thought to end on. It feels like a fitting conclusion to our deep dive into the world of fear.
I think so, yeah. We've come a long way, exploring how fear manifests, how it's amplified by technology, and how it might be changing in this digital age.
We talked about all the different flavors of fear, how it spreads like wildfire, and the ways it can be used to manipulate and control us.
But we also considered how fear might be more than just a negative emotion. It could be a source of knowledge, a push towards growth, and a path to a deeper understanding of the world.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought. Pay attention to those glitches in the matrix, those moments where fear reveals something deeper about the world around you.
If you come across any
Oh,
interesting conspiracy theories, any unsettling stories, any glimpses into that hidden world,
do you want to hear about them?
yeah, keep exploring, keep questioning,
Ah,
and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the world.
until next time.